Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for Building a Better America, a small business resource community webinar. We will be getting started in just a brief moment, but thank you so much for joining us. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for Building a Better America, a small business resource community webinar. We'll be getting started in just one moment, but thank you so much for joining us today. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today for Building a Better America, a small business resource community webinar. We are so glad that you are joining us today. We're going to do some quick housekeeping before we get started. So we're going to go to that next slide. We're going to ask that if you have a question to please type it into the Q&A function. The U.S. Small Business Administration does not endorse Public-Private Strategies Institute, and this session is being live streamed on Facebook on the SBA's web page, as well as the Public-Private Strategies Institute page as well. Please do not share any personal information in the Q&A function. This is a general webinar on resources for your businesses. And with that, I'm so excited to introduce to you today, Katie Wattenberg, the Secretary for Public-Private Strategies Institute.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be with you all today. As mentioned, welcome to Building a Better America, a small business resource community, a webinar series brought to you by the Small Business Administration. Today, we are discussing developing effective international business strategies for growth with guests from the Economic Development Office of the Department of Commerce, SBA's Office of International Trade, and our partners at the U.S. Black Chambers, Inc. We are excited to have each of you here for the U.S. Small Business Administration webinar series, Building a Better America, a small business resource community. Our goal today and across the series of events is to connect small businesses with the critical resources and information about the Biden-Harris administration's policy agenda, including how the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the American Rescue Plan create opportunities for small businesses. Today, you're going to hear from top government officials on how to engage their specific departments in helping identify, connect with, and engage resources to grow your business. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to now introduce Alejandra Castillo, U.S. Assistant Secretary of Economic Development, Department of Commerce, and Associate Administrator of the Office of International Trade at the SBA, Gabe Esparza. Gabe Esparza has been selected to serve as the Associate Administrator for the Office of International Trade at the U.S. Small Business Administration. In this role, Mr. Esparza is responsible for leading export loan programs, the State Trade Expansion Program, or commonly known as STEP, and assisting small businesses in trade. Previously, he served as a public official in the city of Los Angeles, my home state of California, appointed by the mayor to the Board of Civic Service Commissioners, and as vice president of global business development in the commercial payments division at American Express. A seasoned executive with over 25 years of experience leading businesses spanning both large corporations and nimble startups, Mr. Esparza has also spent the last 5 years as an investor, advisor, and operator in a variety of entrepreneurial ventures. Ms. Castillo was sworn in as a U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Economic Development on August 13, 2021. So I think we should celebrate her 1-year anniversary, Assistant Secretary Castillo. She has served in leadership positions for 3 Presidents Biden, Obama, and Clinton. Her professional career spans 2 decades, focusing on creating equitable and inclusive opportunities for all Americans. Prior to EDA, Ms. Castillo, Secretary Castillo, was the Chief Executive Officer of the YWCA USA, where she championed the 163-year-old organization delivering critical social, educational, and economic development services through its 204 associations. In 2014, she was appointed by President Obama to serve as the National Director of the Commerce Department's Minority Business Development Agency, or MBDA, becoming the first Hispanic woman to lead the agency. During her tenure, she led MBDA's efforts to boost the growth and global competitiveness of minority business enterprises. Under her leadership, MBDA expanded its effort to help MBA or minority businesses enterprises gain access to capital, contracts, and business opportunities, assisting MBEs in growing in size and scale. Gabe, I'll turn it over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Katie. It's good to be with everybody today. Welcome. I'm excited to be joining you to discuss growth strategies and tips for building an international business strategy, along with my friend, Assistant Secretary Alejandra Castillo at the EDA, as well as another guest later in the program. Let me begin today with some information for you on the Office of International Trade. The Office of International Trade that I lead at the SBA has a mission to enhance the ability of small businesses to compete in the global marketplace. Why do we do this? 95% of consumers live outside the United States. The global marketplace is a big market. Of the $2.5 trillion in U.S. exports, 32% are from U.S. small businesses. However, many U.S. small businesses don't come about their exporting journey on purpose. In fact, we call them accidental exporters. It could be that during the pandemic, they either lost their job, chose to transition jobs, what have you, and they went and set up their own small business, put up a website, started taking orders, and lo and behold, they got an order from overseas. We want to convert these accidental exporters into more intentional exporters. International sales is a fundamental component of business, and so we want to make sure that our office at the Office of International Trade is doing everything we can to support this journey. Research shows that small businesses that are exporting last 10 years longer, have 3 times the employees, and make 2 times the sales. And so our hope today is to empower you to be even more strategic about where your company fits in this global marketplace. Next slide, please. So let me start with a little overview of the SBA. This slide that you see is specific to the Office of International Trade, but I'm going to come back up to 30,000 feet for a second and give you the principal areas that we work on in the SBA overall. So first and foremost, we offer technical assistance and training for companies about what it means to be a small business, having a business plan, getting access to capital, finding buyers, etc. But of course, one of those components that I just mentioned is our second main piece of the SBA's job, which is providing access to capital. So this can come in the form of loans and working capital lines. And hopefully, as many of you know, the way in which we do this is through the private sector banking infrastructure, because the SBA is the guarantor of these loans to encourage the private sector to make these loans to what is conceivably more risky opportunities. Small businesses, and in our case, exporters, by definition, more risky. So we provide this guarantee to the small business environment and ecosystem through private sector banking. The third thing that the SBA does is revenue growth capital opportunities. This is where we seed the marketplace with grants and other long-term patient capital. It is also where we, through our Office of Government Contracting and Business Development, put forth the $600 billion in annual government contracts. The SBA is actually sort of the watchdog agency amongst the 15 agencies of the federal government, where we encourage our fellow agencies to make sure that they are doing their best to spend with small businesses. Lastly, of course, as our climate continues to evolve and change, the disaster relief and assistance component of the SBA has become a growing piece of the portfolio. And within that, environmental justice is an important component of what we're working on. Again, both for recovery from disasters, but in addition to resiliency and coming back even stronger. We do all of this through an equity lens to make sure that historically underserved and underrepresented communities are taking advantage of and have access to the products and services and benefits of the SBA. Now, as we get into what this specific slide talks about is what my office, the Office of International Trade, works on. It does mirror what the SBA does overall with a few interesting tweaks. Again, we also have education and technical assistance. And then with our funding and loan guarantees, we actually place more focus on working capital lines because we know that small businesses who are exporting have country risk, buyer risk, currency risk, a number of risks that domestic operators don't have. And so working capital is actually a much more suitable tool for these businesses than a typical term loan, although we also have typical term loans as well. We also have the State Trade Expansion Program, which I'll get into a little bit more in detail. And finally, the trade policy component of what we work on provides access to markets. So where there are free trade agreements being discussed around the world, my office has a seat at the table in tandem with Ambassador Tai and the U.S. Trade Representative's office, where we put forth the interests of the small business owner for all free trade agreements and discussions that we're having around the world. Now, again, I mentioned that during the pandemic, there were many an accidental exporter. We want to make sure that these accidental exporters become intentional exporters. One of the ways that we encourage this evolution is through the use of digital tools and incorporating the digital economy in everything that they do, whether that's having a website, whether it's using an e-commerce engine, or actually being in the digital economy, software as a service being one example. We know there's an enormous amount of growth coming from this sector, and we will continue to focus on that through our efforts in the Office of International Trade. Next slide, please. So, finding information for your strategy, the Small Business Exporters Association released a study earlier this year in July of 2022 and found that U.S. small businesses that hadn't already begun exporting were interested, but they just didn't know how to get started. So this is where our office offers assistance in this area, including through on-demand resources at SBA Trade Tools. So there are a number of things at our website, sba.gov/international, and Trade Tools is one of those. Trade Tools provides information on exporting geared toward small businesses, of course. And we can connect you to resources to explore market opportunities and connect to export resources across the federal government. And we'll get into some of that conversation with the Assistant Secretary here shortly. We also connect small businesses to other trade experts by phone and email to answer questions at any stage of the trade journey. To get started, we simply ask you to go to sba.gov/international, click on Develop Your Export Plan, and get started. Next slide, please. All right, when we talk about STEP, the State Trade Expansion Program, so small businesses often don't know all the resources that are available to help them to get started on their international strategy. One important resource to know about is the State Trade Expansion Program. This is a program that can help you participate in trade missions, trade shows, make your website more accessible to international buyers. In effect, this is a program in which we provide roughly $20 million to the states. The states match a portion of that funding and then reimburse small businesses for their export-related spending. This is a great and amazing program. You can find out if your state or territory is a part of the STEP program at sba.gov/STEP. And in about a month, we will be making the announcements for the states that are receiving STEP grants in the coming year. And I highly encourage all of you who are interested not only in continuing to evolve your exports, but to be able to get reimbursements for some of your export-related expenses to join us in this program. So you can work with your SBA small business counselors to refine your strategy and discuss where STEP can be helpful to you, as well as the local state resources as well. All right, next slide, please. All right, as we get into export finance, this will be our last piece before we get into the conversation with the Assistant Secretary. Access to capital and export finance is supremely important to growing one's business. And in developing international business strategy, you may need to find capital to finance your growth to support more orders. So we have 20 plus export finance managers regionally throughout the United States. And I encourage you to get in touch with your local export finance manager. Again, we offer three types of loan and line products. We have an Export Express, international trade, which are term loans, and an export working capital, which is a working capital line. All three products will help you with your international plans as you grow your business. All right, let's turn it over now. Next slide, please, or let's take down the slides and get together with the Assistant Secretary. So if we can bring the Assistant Secretary on.
Good afternoon.
Excellent. Welcome, Alejandra. How are you?
Doing great. And thank you for that presentation. No matter how much you know about exporting, it's always great to have a primer that guides you through that journey.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us today, and we thank you for your service to the country and all that you've done over the years. And we'd love to talk to you a little bit today about what the Commerce Department does overall, and obviously the Economic Development Administration and your leadership there specifically. But because all of our agencies work hand in hand together, if you could just start by telling us a little about the Commerce Department overall and its role with small businesses and its role in the export and international trade journey.
Sure. So let me start by saying thank you to Katie for that very kind introduction, and for all the work that your office does as well, Associate Administrator Esparza. I also want to thank the SBA and the Public-Private Strategy Institute for the invitation to participate in the Building a Better America webinar series. And let me start by very generally, I think most people, when we talk about the Department of Commerce, may not really understand, well, what is it? Is it business? Is it not? Commerce is 13 different bureaus. And I know that some folks may be surprised, but Commerce is the Census Bureau, which we need census data in order to not only know where people live, who they are, their demographics, their income, so much of that information to glean as business owners. So census is critical. Department of Commerce is also NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which, as you well pointed out, Gabriel, if I may call you Gabriel,
Please.
NOAA tells us, not only what's happening with changes in climate, but also warnings of tornadoes and hurricanes and things of the sort, which are critical also when we're shipping, right? So when we think about the international trade journey, NOAA also plays a very important part. Commerce is also the International Trade Administration, which we'll talk a little bit in a minute, but it's also the National Telecommunication and Information Agency, which right now received $42 billion for broadband. And if the pandemic taught us anything, it was that in order to survive as small businesses, we needed that broadband to be able to pivot to e-commerce. So I can go on and on all the different agencies, but I'm going to focus on EDA, which is the agency the bureau that I lead. And it's exciting because right now, and I just want to put a plug in, we talk about the American Rescue Plan. We talk about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. We just passed the CHIPS and Science Act. And I know that you're going to be talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. When you take all these incredible, important pieces of legislation in the context of what's happening, we are actually changing and transforming the economic landscape of our country. And EDA is right at the center of it. So EDA is the only federal agency that focuses on economic development. And we've been around for 57 years. And we started out with public works, a lot of, the roads and water and sewage pipelines. But we've also evolved throughout these 57 years. And right now, I will tell you, it's an exciting time for EDA. We work with comprehensive economic development strategies that are prepared across the country by different communities. And our engagement is really to build from the bottom up, middle out, as President Biden likes to say. At this moment in time, we're very focused because we have 45 days left to push out the American Rescue Plan dollars, which EDA received $3 billion. And we had 6 different grants. The 2 that I really want to underscore are the Good Jobs Challenge. We know that there are 11 million jobs that are unfilled. So we need to make sure that we're not only providing workforce development, but we're providing workforce development that is, again, driven by the community, centered around the employee, and engaging employers. And this particular grant had also wraparound services. So everything from transportation, childcare. What we need to make sure that our workers have in order to be successful. And then the second big grant that I want to talk about is the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, which we will be soon announcing. And that's a $1 billion grant. That grant is going to be important for everyone on this webinar because it will transform locations in terms of the industries of tomorrow. And a lot of what EDA is doing right now, as I mentioned before, and I'll stop in a second, is to create the ecosystem, the right elements to make sure that not only businesses of today are succeeding, but that they're also able to pivot to those industries of tomorrow that are going to be important, not just for the domestic consumers, but as you well pointed out, Gabriel, for those 95% that live outside of the US. And that is the opportunity that I think we all need to seize. And I'm excited about it.
So that's excellent overview of all the things that you've got going on in commerce and some of the amazing grant programs and funding that you're going to be able to put to work throughout the economy. When we think about the journey that a typical small business takes in their export aspirations, we talked a little bit about the accidental exporters, but for any exporter, any company that wants to engage in international trade, some people might think that it's a journey from a small business to a medium-sized business and therefore perhaps graduates from working with the SBA over to Commerce and XM and other agencies throughout the government. But I actually think that's a falsehood in that there are things that we can do together today, and we do together today between our two agencies. So talk to us a little about what the Commerce Department broadly does to support small businesses in their research of other countries, in finding a buyer. What does the Commerce Department do today in that journey?
Sure. So, when you talk about the accidental exporter, I feel that, my family was one of those accidental exporters. We know that, for example, minority-owned companies are twice as likely to export because of linguistic and cultural ties. So in many ways, my family fell into that category. But it is critical, and that's the great job that you all do at SBA, as well as the job that ITA does, the International Trade Administration, which is to provide those tools, how to, as you well pointed out, how to know the data, which countries are you thinking about, what type of capital can be provided, whether it's in terms of the government or the private sector. But at the end of the day, it's also making sure that, one, you have information that is going to be pertinent to your business. It's not going on a vacation or a trip. It's really looking at that marketplace. One of the bureaus that I failed to mention when I was talking about commerce is the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, because it is critical that as you go through this exporting journey, that you also protect your assets, and your intellectual capital and your intellectual property is a key asset that has to be and must be protected. So I know there was a question on the chat about protecting your intellectual property, and that is the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So I'm sure we'll put up the link to that. So again, I think that right now, one of the things that we should be paying attention to is where are all these investments that I mentioned before in these big 4 pieces of legislation, whether it's in renewables, in electric vehicle charging stations, in semiconductor manufacturing, in construction. All of that is going to happen in the US, but those skills and know-hows, technologies are also going to be prime to thinking about how do we start exporting across the globe.
Well, your mention earlier of your own family's experience, I think, is important to make it real for so many of the businesses that are out there. In fact, it underscores for us one of the theses that we have, that a focus on diaspora communities, right? Those communities that are either immigrant, second generation, third generation, are predisposed to export back to countries of origin because they know the language, they know the culture, they know the movida, right? How to get things done in a particular place. And therefore, we are focusing on that quite specifically at the SBA, and we know your partners in that effort broadly at the Commerce Department. I'm curious, what's next, other coming attractions that you might have in EEA and things that you can give our audience a little bit of coming attractions on, perhaps?
Wow, so many coming attractions. As I mentioned before, the announcement of the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, which again is a $1 billion grant. We're going to be selecting anywhere between 20 to 30 sites across the country. And it's important to pay attention because these are sites where the government is going to be investing a lot of capital, but also the private sector as well, to spur up industries such as aerospace and agrotech, construction, semiconductors. Pay attention to those areas once we announce, because it'll be very interesting to see the growth of those areas. We talk about regional economic development because, again, economic development has no borders. And what we want to do is to have a collective understanding of those areas and regions of the country where we need to grow. And I should say that one of the things that has occurred at EDA is that we revisited our investment priorities, and equity is at the core. So our philosophy is to make sure that, particularly as we get through this pandemic, is that communities are growing and no one is left behind. So another coming attraction I will tell you is with the CHIPS and Science Act. I talked about the semiconductor and how desperately needed it is to have those manufacturers inside the US. But there's another piece that's very important, which is the tech hubs. EDA possibly, it's been authorized but not appropriated as of yet, but EDA may receive anywhere between $8 to $10 billion to create technology hubs across the country. And again, this is where small businesses will play a huge role, because our goal is to not just identify those technologies, but also commercialize them, making them available to the marketplace so that small businesses in particular can then take them, create new products and services, and then be able to not just sell them in the US, but also sell them abroad. So those are some of the big highlights, but there's a lot happening. And again, I want to underscore, we are in the moment of seeing how the economic landscape of our country is truly being transformed by so much of the legislations that President Biden has enacted.
That is lots of exciting stuff coming down the pike. Let's perhaps close on what is important to so many small businesses, is to make sure that they realize that the Small Business Administration, the Commerce Department, EDA in particular, are available to them, right? So many small businesses feel that, especially if they're small sole proprietors, does the government, those people in Washington, D.C., are they really available for me? Can they help me? And so in order to make this real and practical and the connective tissue for us and small businesses, I shared a number of website addresses and that there are local resources on the ground. How does a small business get a hold of Commerce? How does the small business get a hold of the EDA? Share with us, if you could, what resources are directly available for folks there.
So again, commercedoc.gov, 13 different bureaus. So there you can find access to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to learn more of how you to protect your intellectual property. You can access information through the census portal as well, in terms of information on population growth and mobility. So the doc.gov is your general portal to access all of our 13 different bureaus. Commerce is huge, but we have regional offices as well. EDA in particular has 6 different regional offices. So please access eda.gov, which is our website. The other one I would mention is ita.gov or trade.gov. So that you can also access not just the amazing services that you have, Gabriel, under SBA, but also access our U.S. Export Assistance Centers, our USEACs, which there, again, you have information to help you both identify the data that you need in terms of which countries to export, be part of trade shows, be part of a lot of the activities that ITA is doing, and when you go abroad, to access the services through our U.S. embassies as well. So those are just a few of the emails and website. And just know that for Commerce, again, we like to say we're the Department of People and Communities. So our goal is to make sure that small businesses are growing in size and scale, and that those barriers to access to capital, access to contracts, and access to markets are eliminated, so that you can all make sure that your entrepreneurial dreams are fulfilled.
Well, I will just underscore that by thanking you for your partnership and the Commerce Department overall, because the USIACs that you described and the U.S. Commercial Service in partnership with the U.S. Foreign Commercial Service are great resources on the ground. These are not just people in D.C. This is every state, every community. There are SBA field resources. Our district offices, our export finance managers are in the field and partner every day with your office and the broader commerce resources of the U.S. Commercial Service that's around the country, 200 some odd individuals, if I remember correctly. And so it's collectively this network, and to add on top of that, the Small Business Development Centers, which is another public-private partnership, the SCORE mentors, all of these resources are available to connect with you, your small business, and talk about international trade and what it means to be an exporter. And so I encourage you to take advantage of those resources. So, Assistant Secretary Castillo, thank you for your time. It's wonderful to see you. Thank you for all that you do in your service. And we will be talking to you again shortly.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you. All right. So I'm going to turn it back over to Renee. Renee, if you want to jump in and take it away.
Thanks, Gabe. And we're going to come back to Gabe in a little bit because he's going to talk to one of the amazing community resource partners that we're going to talk about in a few. But next, we're going to talk about some additional resources and information. And then we're going to talk about how you can become a COVID-19 vaccination small business leader, and then get into another conversation with Gabe. So let's go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about the amazing Inflation Reduction Law, the dynamic bipartisan infrastructure law, the American Rescue Plan, paid leave, and Made in America. And again, all of these slides will be made available to you if you register for the webinar. So you'll get an email tomorrow with the recording and this slide deck with the links as well. So the Inflammation Reduction Act. So on this past Tuesday, August 16, 2022, President Biden signed into law the Inflammation Reduction Act, the IRA, which is also known as, which will lower costs for small businesses and working families by making healthcare more affordable, level the tax playing field for small businesses versus large corporations, reducing the deficit, and combat the climate crisis. Slide. So when we're talking about the IRA, more specifically with the taxes, the IRA will not raise taxes on the vast majority of small businesses or working families. This law is not funded in any way by personal tax increases on small businesses or working families under $400,000, which is roughly about 98% of all Americans, right? The IRA doubles the refundable research and development tax credit for small businesses, raising it from $250,000 to $500,000. The credit can be applied against payroll taxes and a wide variety of expenses, including product development and technology. It increased funding for the IRS, which will not be used to target small businesses or working families. The IRS will be able to upgrade their processes and focus on areas of challenges that they've been seeing over the recent years for the agency, such as large corporate and global high net worth taxpayers, focus on pass-through entities, and multinational taxpayers. And again, the IRS has promised that the investment of these enforcement resources will be designed around the Department of Treasury's directive that will not impact small businesses under that $400,000. Now, when we're talking about healthcare, the IRA will make prescription drugs more affordable without hurting innovation. A recent survey found that more than 80% of small business owners support allowing Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices. And then also the IRA will provide a 3-year extension, which is going to be through 2025, of enhanced subsidies for small business owners who are buying their own health coverage on the Affordable Care Act marketplaces, also known as the ACA. This means it extends temporary subsidies, preventing those who are paying out-of-pocket costs, like those premium payments, from rising across the board next year for virtually about all 13 million subsidized enrollees. And then the marketplace subsidies are still in place when Medicaid maintenance of eligibility ends. Many people enrolled for Medicaid and could not find similarly low cost coverage. So that's going to be a great benefit for many of those. Let's go on to the next slide. When we're talking about clean energy, there is a new or being restored the solar PTC, which could be more valuable than the ITC for larger scale, more efficient solar power generation projects. Transferability for tax credits will be particularly significant for smaller project developers and will enhance the value of credits for larger developers, but tax equity will still be used in some cases to monetize accelerated depreciation. The new 45X credit for manufacturing solar cells, wafers, modules, etc., is a game changer that will spur US solar manufacturing to agree that may not yet be fully appreciated. Let's go on to that next slide. Now we're talking about the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed on November 15th, 2021 by President Biden and signed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act into law, making a historic investment of $550 billion in new funding for large infrastructure projects, supply chains, broadband, and drinking water. This is the largest investment in the nation's infrastructure since 1956. Some areas that we want to highlight are it's $55 billion in projects to deliver clean water, $65 billion to expand the country's broadband, $110 billion to repair and rebuild the country's crumbling roads, and $90 billion in modernizing public transportation. The impact of this bill to small businesses, well, it's going to virtually touch every part of Main Street and the economy. The law will expand access to tens of billions of dollars to federal, state, and local government contracts. The U.S. Department of Transportation alone is to award more than $37 billion in federal contracts. This is supposed to support an estimated 700,000 jobs per year. It's going to help businesses hire new employees and reach new customers, and foster development of Main Street small businesses in underserved communities. And to learn more about the bipartisan infrastructure law, please go to the guidebook at bill.gov. Next slide. Now, the American Rescue Plan. In 2021, Congress passed the American Rescue Plan, the ARP, and CARES Act, which focused on helping small businesses and consumers. It supported communities that were struggling in the wake of COVID-19, and the plan provided critical support to those communities. It provided emergency grants, lending, and investments at hard-hit small businesses so they can rehire and retain workers. This distributed more than $360 billion in emergency funding for state, local, territorial, and tribal governments. This also helped hard-hit public transit agencies avoid layoffs and service reductions as well. Out of the ARP comes the Community Navigator pilot program. And many of you may have known about this program. It is designed to reduce barriers that underrepresented and underserved entrepreneurs often face in assessing the programs they need to recover, grow, or start their businesses. There's a total of $100 million in funding that was provided to 51 organizations. Selected projects will cover diverse communities across the US and Puerto Rico, and the grantees will serve as those hubs. We're going to hear from one today. Several lead organizations will be incorporated, and those will be the spokes. And they have the trusted relationships in those local communities. They will connect small businesses to those critical resources and assistance, including financial assistance and access to capital, contracting and procurement, marketing, operations, business development, and exporting, and industry-specific training. The tax incentive, paid family leave tax incentive. If you are looking to still see if this is applicable to you, you may want to contact whoever prepares your taxes and see if this is something that you're still eligible for. But under this program, employers can offer up to 12 weeks of paid leave The leave can be used to take care of a family member, maternity or paternity leave with a biological or adopted child or children. In exchange for offering the leave, employers will receive as much as a 25% tax credit for the amount of wages replaced. The policy is targeted to hourly employees who would not otherwise have access to paid family leave, and employees who participate cannot make more than $72,000 per year. And then we have the Made in America. Ensuring the future is made in America by all of America's workers, launching a whole of government initiative to strengthen the use of federal procurement to support American manufacturing. This is a program created out of the office of the White House Office of Management and Budget. The Made in America program, you can find more information at madeinamerica.gov, but also wanted to highlight that there are tools that you can use for this, which is going to SAMS.gov, going to the GSA, and also becoming a federal contractor perspective you can use with the U.S. Small Business Administration's website as well. Now we're going to talk about how you could be a vaccination small business leader and updates you should know about COVID-19. There's a few updates that you should know. That one, there's been several waves of the pandemic since 2020. There are more that are expected, and we should all just, be cautious with that. With that being said, there is a website that you can go to learn more about updates and preparedness and plans with the focus on 4 key areas, and that is the whitehouse.gov/COVID plan. Next slide, please. And then what you can do as a small business leader, let's go back one slide, please. What you could do as a small business leader is to get vaccinated in your booster shots. If you are already vaccinated, encourage your employees, family, friends, and neighbors to get vaccinated as well. Create a vaccination plan for your business, review state and local vaccine policies, or seek legal guidance. Consider incentives such as a new paid leave tax credit that we just spoke about. And then whether you encourage to incentivize, mandate vaccines, communicate the plan to your employees, both verbally and in writing. Continue to follow the CDC for guidance on whether wearing masks and social distancing. And then also there are 2 amazing websites that you'll receive during your email tomorrow that you could click on for additional information. And with that, I'm going to bring back Gabe, who's going to introduce the next interview that he's going to do.
All right. Thank you, Renee. Now I'd like to introduce Alisa Joseph, Director of Programs at the U.S. Black Chambers, Inc., to discuss with us some tips on how to build out your international business strategy. So, Alisa, welcome.
Gabe, thank you so much for having me.
Good to see you. All right. Well, let me do a brief introduction for you. So, Alisa has a background in strategic planning, program design, and marketing with over 25 years of experience in the financial services industry. She serves as the Director of Programs for the U.S. Black Chambers, Inc., leading with counsel, guidance, and management expertise in designing and implementing programs for Black and minority businesses to help them scale and grow. Her work has enabled the USBC to serve thousands of Black businesses with digital, virtual programs and support Black Chambers in the past few years. So, Alisa, thank you again for joining us and welcome. Let me also extend a bit of a congratulations to you and the team for opening the new USBCC Greenwood Women's Business Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma earlier this year. It's a historic time, obviously, in many ways for SBA's Women's Business Center program, and we appreciate your partnership in increasing support to women and underserved communities around the country.
Well, thank you, Gabe. It's a pleasure to be here today. On behalf of Ron Busby, President of the U.S. Black Chambers Incorporated, we are just very grateful to be part of this conversation and want to thank you and the team for including us in it.
Very good. Well, let me start off with a question, if I can.
Sure, absolutely.
Which is when we think about, small businesses and minority small businesses thriving and growing. And the conversation we had earlier with the assistant secretary, and generally the theme of the things that we've been talking about today, which is how do you become an exporter, right? So what would your guidance be based on your experience and the businesses that you've interacted with, as well as the chambers, in thinking about how do companies start to build out their business strategy to include international sales and look at international markets?
So thank you for that question. I think the first thing to know is that you are not alone. You don't have to go it alone. Whenever we talk about just general business planning as it relates to businesses doing business throughout the US, it's really no different when we start to think about what we do in both the import and export space, right? Your strategy is really critical. And so, like most things in life, we sort of define, how we're going to do it, and whether when it comes to our kids, when it comes to general things that we might do around hobbies or
you need a plan.
We need a plan for everything that we do, and so it's no different here. And so I would love for people to sort of not think about this as an exercise in futility. It is not. It is an exercise that's really important to help you understand where you're going, why you're going there, who your customers are, why you're going to be marketing to them, and how you don't lose money in the process. I'm all about you being able to grow your revenue and increase your profits at the end of the day. And so probably the best way to do this is to talk about it through an example.
Sure.
Of how this would work. Because as I listened to both you and Administrator Castillo, what I think that we do best at the USBC is we are that connector. So if you don't know what to do, you leverage us, you leverage our other diverse chamber partners, whether it be the US Hispanic Chamber, the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber, the Pan Asian Chamber, whoever, to help you get connected to these resources. So that's number one. The second thing is that you're coming to me first at USBC to help you put your plan together. And so what we're going to do, number one, is get an understanding of what it is you're trying to do. We are then going to align resources to you to help you in that process. So that might be through a small business development center, a procurement technical assistance center, or a PTAC, all of those places that will help you do that plan, because you don't have to do it alone. Right? That's how we're starting this. Next, what we want to think about is potentially, before you dive into the deep end, really be thinking about maybe attending a trade mission or going to an international trade expo, because that's where you're going to get your feet wet and really understanding how people are conducting business. So you can kind of see that firsthand as part of the work. Next is, for me, I'm thinking about you potentially going to either the SBA's export office or the Office of International Trade. And the reason you want to do that is because you want to understand what products are in the marketplace that are of need, because that's where you get your competitive advantage. And you also want to be thinking about the things that are finding out information that you might not even know that you don't know, right? Part of the reason of going to a lot of these connector points that I'm talking about is because there are times we don't know what we don't know. And these folks are really experts in their field, and they can help you jump over layers so that you're not sort of mired in things that have already been solved for. So that's another thing that we need to be thinking about. One other thing I want to introduce into this conversation, because I saw something in the chat talking about importers. Well, there are a number of trade zones, foreign trade zones around the US. They help you keep your taxes down for either incoming materials or outgoing materials, right? And so we have to leverage those opportunities as well. So that's another place where I would think you would need to start to build that competency within your plan. Once you sort of identify your customer, once you sort of understand your resources, make sure that your accountant and your attorney are in the mix, because you need your accountant to help you put your projections and understanding how you're going to really gain your revenue from this venture. And you need your attorney. I heard some mention about patents and trademarks. You need that part, but you also need people to review your contract, because you might be dealing with someone overseas that you don't know. One of the things we want to do is know our customers. And sometimes that's not possible in this process in the beginning. And so you need somebody to be able to make sure that you've got all the ins and outs that you need so that you're not losing money on your deal. And then finally, again, I think you just pull all those resources together. Come back to us, come back to the other resource partners that I talked about, make sure your plan is in place. And that is really going to help you understand exactly what it is you want to do, how you want to do it, when you want to do it, and how you're going to be compensated for your work.
So that is perfect. And let me now circle back. The existence of a plan not only helps guide your business in terms of keeping you on plan and keeping you focused and in line, but as we segue now into a question on access to capital, we know that these plans are fundamental to getting a loan, right? You can't go to the bank and say, I need a loan to start exporting without having that plan. They're going to ask you for that plan. So you've spent many years in the private sector banking sector. So talk to us about the role that funding and access to capital, what investors are looking for, what bankers are looking for. How does that component play into the exporting journey?
So it's critical that, number one, your plan makes sense, but that you also don't use a scattershot approach in what you're doing. A lot of times we have great ideas about what we want to do. And there are times where you need to sort of narrow your scope, get to the one or two things that are critically important for you to realize what you're doing, and then be able to go to the bank with that. And that's where, again, PTAC providers, SBDC providers, USBC, others can help you in ensuring that that plan makes sense. Like anything else, you've got to pitch what it is. You want somebody to understand your dream, you've got to pitch that. But you got to have your document and your numbers in place to support that. And that is how the business plan connects back to the bank. At the end of the day, when I look at both small business owners as well as financial institutions, what's critical is both of you want to get paid. You want to get paid from your customer, and the bank wants to get paid from you if they're lending you money. And so whenever you're doing this work, really have a plan of being able to show the bank how they're going to be repaid. Now, you don't have to start out fully with a traditional banking institution. You can start with Community Development Financial Institution, which is a CDFI. We work with a lot of them that do a lot of the other things I just was talking about from a resource perspective, but they also help you put your financial projections together. They also are lenders, so they can help you walk through that plan and help you get to the steps that you need to get to in order to be able to get the financing that you need. If you are ready for that step of working with a bank, then again, just critical of having your kitchen cabinet, yourself, your attorney, your accountant, and possibly, a mentor or consultant that you confide in that helps you work with that banker to get the plan together. That's why relationships matter. I would suggest not going to a bank that you haven't done business with before. I would suggest making sure you have a banking relationship starting out, because this is riskier in terms of the work that has to go on. But once you've got it locked in, it works like clockwork, just like any other thing that you might be doing in the US. And so those things to me are really kind of the critical pieces of having a banker really understand, or a financial institution understand, what it is you're trying to do with your business.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And I'll remind everybody that the SBA's role in access to capital, aside from the grant programs that I talked to you about, at least with respect to loans and lines of credit, is that we work with the private sector banks to provide guarantees to them so that they are more apt and more willing to make loans to these growing small businesses. I do also think, Elisa, and I know you'll join me in this thought, which is it's important to underscore that for some businesses, the idea of having debt at all is scary, or they want to avoid it. And I think it's important, there's oftentimes immigrant communities, minority communities just shy away from debt, period. And I think it's important for our audience to know that this is not a scary thing. It is part of the journey. Most successful businesses along the way at some point are taking on some debt. And so this is, I think, to underscore your point, it's about having people around you that can help you understand this ecosystem and help you understand when is the right time to engage in taking on some debt?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Gabe. There are so many different resources besides traditional banks that can help in this process. There are times where you're looking to either, bring in new equipment or bring on new employees or buy more inventory for what it is that you need to do in order to produce the amount of product that you're going to need to sell overseas. And so resources like, for instance, the Exim Bank, who specialize in exporting, and they are they work for the government from that perspective, and they can kind of tie you in to all the resources that you need to be able to do it. That can be term loans, that can be lines of credit, that could be what most people don't even use or don't think about, particularly when you're starting your journey, which are letters of credit. The importance of a letter of credit is that it is protecting you and it's protecting the bank. So your product gets overseas to where it's supposed to go, and you're not there to receive it, right? And you're depending on the company who is accepting your goods to make sure to do what they're supposed to do, which is to accept them, to pay you on time, all of that. Well, a letter of credit helps to mitigate your risk as well as the risk of a bank, because before anything changes hands, the bank is sort of the underwriter in that space and is going to make sure that your bills of lading, any financial contracts that need to be taken care of, anything relative to the acceptance of that product in that country, they're going to make sure that everything is done properly. So you've got some security in that sense. And that's a vehicle that's not used often. Most people don't know a lot about it. But I think between traditional banks as well as the SBA, the Exim Bank, and others, these are tools that can be leveraged to your benefit.
Perfect. Well, Lisa, we never have enough time for these conversations. So let me just, again, thank you for your thoughts today. Thank you for all the work that you do at the Black Chambers and continue to be a resource for us. And thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you, Gabe.
All righty. If we can then move on to the next slide, if you don't mind. And we'll close out with just a couple of calls to action and some next steps that people can take. So let me see if we get to this slide. Next slide, please. Very good. Okay. So I will thank you again, Elisa. Thanks the Assistant Secretary Castillo, of course, Public-Private Strategies. I do want to end on a couple of points that we can point out to folks. The SBA, the Economic Development Administration, are part of your government, your partner in the community, ready and willing to assist you. Our team is on hand to help you access resources and to support U.S. small business owners and stakeholders around the country. As Elisa just shared, the key to being strategic is having a written strategy that also includes various step-by-step processes in your plan to grow and export overseas. And there are a number of resources available there, small business counseling and assistance centers through the SBA, development centers, women's business centers, and other resources can help develop a successful international strategy and plan to reach your company's potential. We'd like to invite you to an upcoming event, which is on September 13th. We have a Learn to Trade, Developing an Effective Export Plan, exactly what we've been talking about. And the registration link is on sba.gov/OIT or sba.gov/international. And also, I believe it should be in the chat at some point. We'd like to invite you to take that next step with us and sign up now and join our Learn to Trade series. There are many, many more webinars that we have throughout the year, also in conjunction with PPSI, but also directly out of the Office of International Trade. There's one-on-one counseling. And for more resources and to find these advisors, please visit us at sba.gov/international or email us at international@sba.gov. So with that, Katie, thank you. Renee, thank you. The entire team at PPSI, and we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Gabe. We'll go to the next slide. And if you have any questions about the SBA and outside of today's webinar, please feel free to use answerdesk@sba.gov. And if you have any questions about this webinar and want like a copy of today's presentation and you did not register for the webinar, please go to events@publicprivatestrategies.com. And we are so excited for next week's webinar, which will be on August 31st, which will be about access to capital for minority businesses. So we look forward to seeing you next week at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Bye-bye.